Welcome to our session on digital transformation. Transformation as shaped by the pandemic, as projected going forward, and as would be supported, we hope, by favorable regulatory and policy approaches. I am Jacqueline Ruff, usually known as Jackie. I'm a member of the IIC Board of Directors and Consulting Council at the law firm of Wiley Rein. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to moderate what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation with four very accomplished speakers from leading companies in the telecom, media, and technology sector. These companies are providing services around the world, active throughout Europe, in the United States, in Latin America and Africa, and beyond. So let's turn to what'll be two sessions of dialogues between two of the speakers in each one. And we hope that you will find it very interesting. I'd like to welcome our speakers in this session. The first one is from Comcast, a company in the US where there's a major internet service provider and provider of other services there. Broderick Johnson carries two executive vice president titles because of his responsibility for two areas, for public policy and for digital equity. Our other speaker is Reinhold Kruger from Vodafone. He is Director Policy and Public Affairs, Vodafone Group. And as our audience probably knows, Vodafone is active around the world, including, for example, has a strong presence in Africa. So we will cover the three topics that are in the program and cover each of them going input from each of our speakers. I'm sure it'll be a great conversation. So turning to you, Broderick, as you know, the first topic that we want to explore is the pivoting over the last 18 months, whether in the industry in general or for Comcast in particular. I know that being that I'm living in the US, the program called Internet Essentials has been a long-standing program for Comcast to deal with questions of affordability and so on, and trying to bridge the digital divide. So in these 18 months, changes, pivoting, what would you throw into the conversation on that?
Jackie, thank you very much for that question and for this opportunity to be on this panel. It's indeed a great privilege to be a part of this discussion. We've witnessed universal pivots, as you referred to those, in so many ways across these sectors and others. Let me speak to some of the ways that we at Comcast have adapted and how we've run our operations, how we've engaged with and supported our customers, and how we responded to the needs of our employees. We all know that COVID-19 has had a tremendous impact on nearly every aspect of our daily lives, our physical and mental health, our financial status, our children's education, our ability to communicate with our family, our friends, our coworkers. Across Comcast, NBC Universal, and Sky, we continue to do everything we can to support our customers, our employees, and our communities during these truly unprecedented times. When COVID-19 first forced schools, offices, libraries, and many other facilities to close in March of 2020, Comcast took immediate steps to help Americans stay connected. We rallied behind the FCC's Keep Americans Connected pledge by opening public Wi-Fi hotspots, suspending service disconnections for non-payment, and waiving late fees at the outset of the crisis. Let me be even more specific. We opened our entire network of public Xfinity Wi-Fi hotspots located in businesses and outdoor locations across the country for anyone to use for free, including non-Xfinity customers. That extends through December 13th, 2021, in fact. We created an assistance program that enabled our customers to continue using our services during the pandemic shutdown while keeping their bills low and ensuring that they didn't accrue large outstanding balances, because we want to keep them connected. So we're offering customers in this program a variety of flexible and extended payment options. Our engineers and technicians micro-monitor our network reliability and performance constantly, running more than 700,000 diagnostic speed tests most days. Let me just note that from early March to late May 2020, we saw a 32% increase in upstream traffic, as well as an 11% increase in downstream traffic. But our customers' average broadband speeds have met or exceeded 105% of advertised speeds throughout this unprecedented traffic surge. We also committed $500 million to help our employees where operations have been closed or impacted. And as you mentioned, the Internet Essentials program, we're building on that program, by the way, which is an initiative that has connected 10 million low-income Americans to broadband over the past 10 years. Comcast built partnerships with school districts, local governments, and philanthropies to help get broadband to every student in our footprint who needs it. And so, since March 2020, we've offered eligible new customers 60 days of free internet service through the Internet Essentials program. We've increased the speed of internet service for all new and existing customers for no additional charge. We've introduced parental controls through our acclaimed X5 platform. We have launched the Internet Essentials Partnership Program in order to connect large numbers of students to the internet. And we started the rollout of 1,000 lift zones to create safe spaces for students to access the internet and participate in distance learning. In short, these services we provide matter more than ever as millions of people across the globe rely on the internet and their home phone connectivity from work, access to critical news and educational resources, and to connect with loved ones. But we've done an extraordinary amount to invest in resources and to keep people connected. And it's a responsibility that we certainly have taken on, as have many others, understanding the needs of our neighbors, of our customers, of our own employees, and the communities in which we serve. So that's just sort of a small sense of the things that we have done across the country since the pandemic over the last 18 months.
That's a long list. That's a good list.
Yeah, it's a great list.
And I'm sure, Reinhold, you have a similar story, but could you please share that one with us?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having invited me here, and it's an honor to speak on this panel. Yeah, similarly, well, let me start with the most obvious point, connectivity, and we are providing connectivity. That has become a lifeline for citizens, for businesses, and for government. And the crisis has shown that telecoms and digital services are so essential. I think also all of us, governments, business, and civil society, we have realized that we had to rise to the challenge. Lean in and help manage the crisis, and it was a real crisis. As soon as we saw the scale of the crisis, when this became evident, how deep this would go, we established a 5-point plan, as we called it in Europe, and a 6-point plan in Africa. And what that meant in practice is very similar to what we just heard. We had to invest in maintaining the quality of our networks, because we experienced traffic growth of more than 70%, 70. We supported, and we had to support, critical health services by donating digital devices to hospitals, for example. We helped spreading public health information. And just to give you an idea what that meant in practice, it was, I think, we sent 250 million free SMS messages and enabled free access to health and education information sites to over 20 million people. We also supported communities and businesses. We reduced, for example, our payment terms to SMEs and micro enterprises to 15 days. And that helped with their cash flow and helping consumers manage payment. And the fifth part of this 5-point plan was that we provided data insights to governments for free because they needed help to map the spread of the virus. We even got awards for this. You see there was quite a large number, and similar to what Broderick said, a large number of immediate actions we took. The pandemic has accelerated digitalization all around us, and it has become clear that that the digital transformation of both our economies and societies will be key in building back better now. We have, however, at the same time also seen, if I may refer to that already, we have seen that there is a different light now on the pre-existing digital divides. None of us could have predicted how life-defining these digital gaps would become in such a pandemic. And I just refer to access to online learning, access to telemedicine. And in Africa, you mentioned Africa before, vaccines are currently lying around unused because of unequal access to digital solutions. So just as connectivity and digital proved to be a lifeline, it also now is a great divider in our societies because people are lacking digital skills. We have unconnected rural communities and SMEs that are not sufficiently digitalized. So all of them are disproportionately affected. So we'd like to refer to both our immediate actions, but also that the digital divides have become even clearer during the pandemic.
Broderick, that I think we've seen that in the U.S. as well, right? That spotlighting of the digital divide, right?
Yeah, we certainly have, and you know, sadly, it's nothing new. What the pandemic has done is has certainly, though, brought even greater attention to the disparities and to the need to address the disparities, whether it have to do with access to healthcare, access to education, job skills, training that's necessary in a digital context. The disparities are grave. They have been. I worked in the Clinton White House. I was also fortunate enough to serve with President Obama, and during that period of roughly 2 decades in between, the focus on the digital divide continued and continues to get even more attention, fortunately, from policymakers on both sides of the aisle. There's broad bipartisan recognition of the need to address the digital divides. They affect urban and rural America as they do urban and rural areas across the globe. But these, for me personally, this has been a great concern, again, for several decades now, and to see that we still are greatly challenged by these issues is disappointing, but it also points to opportunity, and I think really an unprecedented opportunity to address these needs.
Which is a good transition into the second theme that we wanted to talk about, which is the digital transformation. What form is it taking? And I'm thinking kind of in a time framework of from now through 2030 or so. What are the sort of midterm anticipated changes and policy initiatives that you're seeing in the sector, you're seeing in your own work? Why don't we turn to Reinald to start that one off, and then come back to Broderick.
Yeah, clearly, thank you, Jackie. Clearly, the theme digitalization that is here to stay, and we will all have to deal with that. And we see, as Broderick mentioned, that there are threats, there are challenges, but there are huge opportunities if we get that right all together. So I mean, not only operators like us, but in particular also government, regulators, and the societies at large. Pre-pandemic, I would say we already knew that, for example, Industry 5.0 would be transformational. Now it is combining with an accelerated digitalization post-COVID. It is a way out of the crisis, if you want. So it's no longer only transformational, but it is a means to build back better. Take, for example, SMEs. We focus a lot on SMEs, not only because they are the beating heart of the European economy. If I focus for the moment on Europe, they make up 99% of European businesses and employ 98 million people across Europe. And I think they're creating 2/3 of new jobs. However, more than half of SMEs face severe losses in revenues due to COVID-19, and they need further support. Digitization makes a difference here. This is why we are seeing our work very much in partnership with the small and medium-sized enterprises. To give you an idea, we run the pioneering IoT platform that spans over 200 countries and 500 partner networks. And we provide free support to more than 2 million business customers through our V for Vodafone Hub digital advisory service. Another area I will mention, and I mentioned that already, is the rural area. Take the rural areas. Europe must reinvigorate, I would say, rural areas and close the urban-rural divide I was referring to before, in order to be able to stimulate economic growth, to green our agriculture, and build up resilience and the inclusion in these rural communities. So what we're doing is, with partners, of course, we're creating smart villages around Europe that benefits businesses and citizens and increases the investment in rural areas. That can only be done in the partnership I have been referring to before, partnership between governments and private sector, because the business cases are not always clear, to put it mildly. When we look into the future, I would also make the case for a much clearer view and a coordinated view on how we invest in 5G, how we roll out 5G, in particular in Europe as well, and how do we do this in cooperation with all stakeholders. We have so much to gain there, and there's an estimated, I think, 10 trillion euro increase in global cross-sector output by 2035. With 5G, 5G will create benefits for all enterprises because remote control, augmented reality interfaces, machine vision, autonomous robots, this will all be at the very heart of the industrial development. And we have recently commissioned a research from Deloitte, and they are estimating a 1 trillion euro digital dividend for the EU alone from a comprehensive and coordinated, ambitious approach to digitalization to underpin Industry 4.0. So you can put it in another way, and sorry for being long, but connectivity and digital, that is likely to become the essential enablers, if not determinants, of our future competitiveness and job creation across all sectors. And this is why we are seeing us as the sector of sectors.
You know, what really jumps out from Raimund's remarks, something that I certainly have been convinced of sometime through what I've read, what I've noticed, but also through my engagement with folks and communities all across the United States. We can't leave folks behind in this digital world. It's not just a matter of sort of civil and human rights, but it's also a matter of smart economic, global economic policy. And people who are living in urban areas and rural areas, whether they be middle income, low income, high income, have so many of the same universal goals and objectives for themselves and their families. And they're acutely aware when they're being left behind, and they have a great hunger to not be left behind and to make sure that their families themselves have the resources that they need as we continue to go through this, this incredible digital transformation. Let me start with this broad principle. And it really drives my life's passion for this work, but also that of Comcast. That's why I'm so glad to be part of the company now and leading these efforts around digital equity. Imagine a world where everyone has what they need to shape the future. And as that world, again, becomes more digital, it's our responsibility to use media and technology to ensure that everyone has the resources and the opportunities they need to participate and to excel in today's economy. That is the essence of digital equity. And so I know for Comcast, we've known that we need to continue to adapt. Other companies know this as well. Local and federal governments understand this too, that we have to continue to adapt to changing circumstances, whether it's, again, for high-income communities or low-income communities or minority communities, urban, rural, whatever. So for example, we started this project called Lift Zones, where we are making sure that more than 1,000 Wi-Fi connected lift zones, we're going to reach 1,000 more than that this year, are in community centers nationwide. Many families in low-income communities don't have access to, don't think it's affordable, don't have the awareness or circumstances to have a broadband at home. So these lift zones provide an opportunity in community centers for these young people to be able to succeed in school or to do other things that are important to be able to succeed in this global digital world. And as we look to the forward to the future, I should say, Comcast again continues to not just sort of look at what we've done over the past 10 years with Internet Essentials, but we also recently started a new major initiative called Project Up. Up meaning unlimited possibilities for the future. And so we have committed to $1 billion project to reach 50 million people on a project that encompasses programs and community partnerships across Comcast, NBC, Universal, and Sky. Again, to connect people to the internet, to advance economic mobility, and to open doors for the next generation of innovators, entrepreneurs, because it's not just about education, but it's also about innovation and entrepreneurship, as well as storytellers and creators. And by bringing all these efforts together under one umbrella, breaking down silos, but under one umbrella and working with our partners in local communities, we can deepen our impact and harness new opportunities that benefit generations to come. Again, here's the fundamental issue. In today's digital world, internet connectivity, digital training, skills in media and technology are essential and central to every part of life, from advancing economic mobility to creating career pathways and to enabling new voices and stories to be shared. But the unfortunate reality still is that not everyone has the same starting point. I was raised in Baltimore, Maryland, a city that epitomizes both the greatness of America, but also some of its greatest and most vexing challenges. Across the US, half of low-income families and 42% of families of color lack access to technology required for online education. By 2030, the demand for employees with basic digital skills will grow up to 69%. But today, nearly 1 in 3 US workers lack basic digital skills, and about half of all Black and Latino workers have limited or no digital skills. We have to continue to attack these disparities and to close these gaps, again, in order to give everyone an opportunity to succeed in this nation and in this world.
I think my takeaway from both of your stories is that they really highlight the way in which this industry, service providers like both of yours, is tied into the users, the potential users, the communities, the story about the IoT that Vodafone has around the world that small, medium enterprises can use, the stories about the Lyft sites in the communities in the US. It's just so clearly embedded already, and with the potential of being embedded to great use, great opportunity. So much potential. Well, you've talked some about partnerships. So let's just talk a little bit about the potential enabling partnerships with governments, right? That's the third question really here. What's the hope for regulators and policymakers to enable positive outcomes for all? I like the way that that was framed on the program. Reinhold, would you like to begin with that? And then Broderick, we'll go to you, and your remarks will be really I think probably the last that we'll have in this session. So think of them as also part of a wrap-up opportunity for all that we've been talking about. Reinhold?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jackie. Indeed, as we all know, we have in this sector, in particular also in Europe, quite a history of very close cooperation and working and living together, if you want, with regulators and government. We are traditionally a quite regulated industry, which has challenges, but I would also say opportunities, because we know each other quite well. But I think it was Albert Einstein who said, you can't use an old map to explore a new world. And the world has fundamentally changed. Remote working is here to stay. Public services will never reverse changes in telemedicine and the digitization of schools. We have talked about this. In Europe, it is encouraging that we now have a clear, long-term, as we call it, digital decade compass from the European Commission, and that's grounded in digital and green transition. So that's very good. Now, it's good to have bold ambitions. We must have then also equally bold actions behind them. Otherwise, it will be difficult to meet the ambition. And we are encouraged, of course, as those who have to bring the digital networks on the ground by the massive amounts of public funds we see around the world, but in particular in the US and in Europe, less so in Africa, and there the international finance institutions, the international organizations have to step in. We're working with those in partnership as well. But here in Europe, we see that recovery and digital recovery in particular, or digital investment, can be funded. However, this can only account for part of what is needed for second to none digital infrastructure. So there is a gap to fill, and this gap has to be filled by the private sector, by private innovations and investment, together, of course, with government and under the monitoring of regulators, what we're used to. So what we would see as the three immediate things that are really necessary for our sector to enable the investment, to make the change in the countries concerned, but in the communities in particular, as Broderick has said, we need a market structure that enables that, a sustainable market structure, to be very open with you, with returns below the cost of capital in Europe, and greater expectations on geographic reach, sharing, and a focus on viable operators is a must. So we very much see that the efficiency in infrastructure needs to drive the competition in service delivery, and that will be ultimately to the benefit of all citizens and the societies at large. Secondly, I would say removal of deployment barriers. This industry has a bit suffered from unnecessary barriers to rolling out networks, with different responsibilities, of course, behind that. This has started to change, which is very good, but we would see much more needs to be done and consistently across Europe in particular. And finally, I would say for us as a mobile operator, there should be a new approach to managing spectrum. So if that would be number 3 on my big wish list. We would need to have longer spectrum licenses, and that could be used to give operators like us confidence to invest and create value rather than a means of fragmenting the industry. And then it is damaging to balance sheets if you have extractive spectrum auctions. The division of European markets in this respect is still not helpful. So what we see is that we should all agree on a level of urgency here in order to bring across the development we have been talking about. And everybody involved in the policy-making process should have the courage, and we need to have the courage as well, to reset this policy environment for what I would call a sustainable competition and investment in connectivity. Sorry for being long.
Well, thank you for that. Broderick, how would you describe your hopes on this front?
Well, Reinhold used the term encouragement or encouraging several times, and I want to pick up on that, because certainly it's an encouraging development in the United States that the Congress and the White House, in an example of bipartisanship, which of course is and sadly often too rare, but in this instance recognizes that broadband indeed is a fundamental aspect of infrastructure investment, that it's not a nice to do, but it is a must do, that the government needs to play that role. And so we are witnessing an unparalleled support for closing the digital divide in both political discourse and government resources in support for broadband. As I mentioned earlier, when I worked for President Clinton in the late 1990s, that we had initiatives and he gave speeches about the importance of bridging the digital divide, but all that focus was certainly nowhere close to where we find it today. I do want to say a couple of things about what government should avoid doing, and then I want to close, of course, with a more optimistic note on what government can do working with the private sector. First, it's very important that regulators not overregulate and thereby create barriers to continued innovation and investment from private sector entities like Comcast. Second, policymakers shouldn't support or subsidize unfair competition or focus resources on solutions in search of perceived problems. And finally, I'd say government should not do what government often does, and that is to lose patience for helping to address difficult and long-standing challenges. We will not bridge the digital divide or digital divides overnight, and government and the private sector needs to have the patience to continue to invest, but also to identify and measure what really truly makes a difference and should be scaled. Now, let me end on a positive note in terms of what government can do. Government can certainly continue to look for ways to support access to deployment in unserved areas. What government can do is to help subsidize the costs of affordable broadband, as it is doing in this country through the emergency broadband program that was established to help respond to the challenges brought on or exposed during the pandemic. And government can also help address problems like low adoption rates and help support digital literacy and awareness and skills training, especially among low-income groups and minorities who are still often unaware that internet access is indeed available to them. At the end of the day, government and the private sector should strive to work hand in hand to bridge the digital divide. There's great reason for optimism. And so I'll end with this. I'm encouraged about the future.
I've noticed Reinhold was nodding vigorously to those comments, and I would do the same. I want to thank both of you for a really interesting exchange on these important topics.
Thank you. It's great to be part of this discussion.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here.
During this segment of our conversation, our speakers are Michael Brian Brown from Liberty Global, where he's Managing Director, Regulation and Competition Policy, and Juan Montero from Telefonica, where he is Chief Public Policy, Competition and Regulatory Officer. welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. We're going to go over the 3 themes and questions that are on the program. So the first one, of course, is about the type of pivoting that you've observed firsthand in your own company and perhaps in the sector in general over the last 18 months. So, Michael, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for that. I think one difference we've clearly seen as a lot of people move from the office to working at home is how important reliable connectivity has become. I mean, for many people, good broadband, good mobile at home have become key to work, social life, entertainment. I think we've all seen that over the last 18 months. And I think that had implications for us and I'm sure for other connectivity providers. I mean, for one example, a Virgin Media study from January, February this year suggested there's been a big shift in online behavior over the last 18 months. Weekday afternoons becoming the biggest time of day for upstream traffic, peaking between 2 and 4 for the first time ever, which has led to a 3-fold increase on pre-pandemic levels for the UK generally. And also I can remember, frankly, in the early days of the pandemic when we were watching very closely what was happening on the network, you could actually see the impact of certain events. I remember at one point when the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson made an announcement, you could actually see as he was speaking, traffic on the network dipped down. And then as soon as he finished speaking, it blasted back up, I guess, whilst everyone contacted their friends. Having said that, although we've seen a surge in demand in some areas, we've generally managed well. Partly also due to just our ongoing investments, which has been $1.4 billion so far this year in 2021. And we're not stopping there. I mean, Juan knows this well, but one example would be the joint venture between ourselves and Telefonica in the UK, Virgin Media O2, have plans they've announced recently to upgrade their entire footprint to fibre by 2028. I think another trend we see is that customers want seamless connectivity and to have it reliably. So fixed mobile convergence has been a key role in our strategy, ever more so after the events of the last 18 months. We now have converged services in Belgium, UK, the Netherlands and Switzerland, some wholly owned, some joint ventures. And we just announced the sale of UPC Poland to Iliad to create a strong fixed mobile challenger there. But what we see in all the operations where we have fixed mobile combinations, convergence ratios are up to over 40%. Switzerland, for example, is at 56. And we really see that customers care about this. They care about the seamless connectivity. So in the markets where we have this fixed mobile products, we see a huge increase in customer satisfaction, better NPS scores, benefiting both ourselves and customers. I think finally, thinking about things that the last 18 months have shown us, I think they've shown us the need for companies such as ours to play a part in addressing the digital divide. So at Liberty, we've been very focused on initiatives to support customers and communities. To give a few examples, in Belgium, Telenet set up their Wi-Fi spots for education, working with schools to provide free broadband connectivity to families that don't have it when the time when their kids needed it for school. We've been providing extra data, mobile upgrades, so forth. And we recently announced a program called Digital Start, based on the idea that everyone should have access to the internet, regardless of skills or background or income. And currently that's launched in Belgium with Telefonica in the UK, Ireland and Poland. So I think those are the main things for me.
Great. Well, Juan, how do those sound familiar? What are the pivoting that you've been doing at Telefonica?
Thank you, Jackie. I think, as Michael explained it, that sounds absolutely familiar for me, and I think I could word by word say the same about Telefonica for this maybe 2 years or 18 months. Maybe to move, I was considering probably a similar answer to Michael, but to include a few other things that has happened after the pandemic and as a consequence of the pandemic. If I can say it this way, I think we have realized how important and how reliable and the responsibility we have towards the societies where we live in. If we come back now to the times to March 2020, when the pandemic started, when the lockout started, at that time, there was a feeling within our companies of absolute commitment not only with the firm, with the business, with our company, but with the societies where our operations run, both in Latin America and both in Europe. And I think that is something to be remembered and to keep within the company, because at that time, we had such a clear message from the very, very top management of our company that we all had to be part of the solution to the crisis as we had never lived, not part of the problem. And both things could happen, because if we imagine for a while, what would have happened if network telecommunications didn't work properly at that time, supporting every service, public service, private life businesses at that time, we would have been part of a great problem. But that did not happen in Europe, and it didn't happen in Latin, even if things were even more challenging there. So I think there's something to be learned from there, and this is a kind of new spirit of new commitment that happened at that time. And this means also other positive effects from that moment on, and I hope that will be kept, apart from those that have to be with the market dynamics that Michael referred to very properly. And this is, we establish much closer relationships with authorities, with regulators, and with society as a whole, because they were looking at us and saying, you are going to be part of the solution, don't you? And you're going to make special efforts. So I think we are at a time now where authorities know connectivity is critical, is even more essential than we knew it was for the future of our societies. And I want to think, and I think this is right, regulators and authorities know we have to work together to make possible this digital compass for 2030 Michael referred to. And we need it in Europe, and we definitely need it in Latam. If we think about Latin America, we think about societies where telecom operators play the same role that in Europe, but unfortunately, they are not yet in a situation where public services and society is that well prepared as we are in Europe. This means at the pandemic time, telecom operators were critical, not only for providing connectivity, but for supporting every kind of digital and public services. And what we expect now, and we are clearly committed to it, is to solve those digital gaps that still exist in some countries, to make sure that digital connectivity is possible all over the country, and to make sure that things as digital skills are more widespread among these societies. This has a lot with education, and digitalization has always a lot to do with education. And even though in countries where transport, where means of communication are not as well built as they are in Europe. So I think there is a great challenge, but probably this is the time after the pandemic, and let's hope to be in a time really post-pandemic very soon, will be times where we all can play a better role. And when I say we, I mean the three parts in the telecom industry, not only network operators, but also authorities and regulators, and of course, society, clients, and businesses.
Michael, when in hearing the points that Juan was just making, I'm wondering if you would have something to add to on this point of kind of a different role in society. You did talk about the programs that for trying to do more in the community. Let's see, the schools, the digital start, and so on. Are there other ways in which the companies similarly kind of saw it, came to see itself as having a different role within
I think
ecosystem?
absolutely. I think all of us recognize that had this pandemic happened 10 years ago, it would have been very different in many of the ways that we tried to deal with it, both in terms of the way we, spoke to our friends when we couldn't see them, the way in which we worked. I mean, Juan and I had the pleasure of working on certainly one of the largest deals of my career, possibly of his too, without any of us ever meeting whilst the deal was in the very heat of the moment. That would have been unimaginable, I think, only a few years ago. So I think that's demonstrated for everyone, certainly in my company, and I'm sure in the industry beyond, that our businesses have a key role as enablers in society. And I think that comes with a degree of responsibility. So I think that message has landed very clearly with us. So we're very focused on connectivity, about the ways in which we can ensure that citizens, not just consumers, but citizens, ordinary people, have connectivity, have the ability to participate fully in our society, which I think services such as ours allow. And I think, and I'll talk about this in a moment, also the importance of sustainability. I mean, to take one example, I mean, we all read endless discussions about the amount of power that's taken up by mining cryptocurrencies. But equally, that's true for many internet services, whether it's the connectivity services that Juan and my companies offer, or that Vodafone or Comcast. But equally, the underlying service providers, what they do. So I think recognizing we have a huge contribution in the green agenda, but also recognizing that we are contributors as well to power consumption. I think that's important, something I'll touch on further. But I think with all that, I've always been very conscious that some people have a tendency to try and lump us together with utility businesses, natural monopolies in water, or energy distribution and so forth. And I do think that the pandemic and our responses to it has only continued to develop that private companies in competition with each other, or sometimes working together where competition rules allow investing together, can have a huge beneficial impact on society. And I think it's important to recognize, and I think we demonstrated that through our actions and the actions of our peers in the last 18 months, that despite how important we are to society, we are yet different from those utilities, and we have a different role to play.
Interesting point. Thank you. So now let's go to the sort of next midterm question that this session is meant to shed light on. It's what form is digital transformation taking? Now, the term digital transformation has really become a term of art, right? You hear about it in all sorts of policy-making venues, and the UN, and industry conversations, etc. So you can make of it what you want, because it is very broad, but it's also fundamental to this period that we're in. So how would you describe, let's say, the midterm future, right? And the things that you see happening, useful to keep them tied a bit to changes that were driven by the pandemic that you've talked about, but let's look out further than that. So Juan, can you get us started on that point?
Yes, thank you, Jackie. There's so many things we could speak about in the midterm. Consider midterms starts today, once this new era post-COVID starts. But I would say to focus in a few minutes that probably, or at least from my point of view, we are probably conscious now that we are facing a digital transformation step, which is critical, which is essential, at least for the two regions where Telefónica operates. It is critical for Europe, and it is critical for Latin America. And we could say it's critical for every region in the world, yes, and that is true. But the problem, as we see it in Europe and in Latin America, is that we have the challenge to be in the first line in the digital era or not. And today it is not that clear. We are in the first line. Probably if we see it from a telecom and from digital service point of view, it is clear that the United States or North America in general, and also the Asia Pacific region is in that first line. But we have the challenge to be at the same level, and for that to happen, we need to digitalize our societies in a way that connectivity is, of course, not the only, but the first and the basic step to be taken. I think about it in a way that I think that for this digital challenge we have in front of us, something we maybe call it the golden triangle or something similar. And this golden triangle in the three vertices has three elements which are indispensable. From my point of view, these are a strong connectivity. These are digital skills for societies and businesses, and these are on the top of connectivity digital services. We need the three of them coming together, and in the absence of any of them, there will not be a digital society as we need it to happen. We telecom operators or communication industry, or as we could call it in many ways today, the former telecom operator industry, of course, focus so much with the Spencer responsibility in the strong connectivity, but also we definitely influence or can help on digital services. Telefónica has a strong vocation in trying to be a digital service, a strong player, not only a telecom operator, and also in helping societies to build their digital skills, because in the absence of these digital skills, digital services don't help. And this is critical in Europe, but even more in Latin America. And this has to be really an objective to be focused. Of course, we can help, but this is a public policy objective for government and for authorities and for education institutions. So if we put all these elements together, and we think now from a telecom operator point of view, I think that point Michael focused before is really critical. We have to guarantee the sustainability of the telecom industry in Europe and in Latin America. And we say I refer again to operators, but very especially to authorities, government, and regulators. We have to definitely consider if the framework we have had in place, we have today in place, but it started 30 years ago. We all probably remember, at least the most veteran of us, that green book, telecommunication green book from at that time, the European Commission. But we have had in place the same regulatory framework for 30 years and very strongly for the last 20 years even. I think it's time to reconsider this, to move and to think if we need, and we definitely do, if we need those strong European players building such a strong European connectivity facilities as in the Digital Compass for 2030 is considered and is promoted by the European Commission, we need really to make possible our European network players growing to be strong enough and to be robust enough from an operational and financial point of view to make that future possible. And probably there's a big question about that yet. So this is something indispensable to be considered, and this is midterm, but as I was saying at the beginning, starting today. We need this to happen not in 10 years, but in 10 months' time.
What would you say, Michael, in response to this? Your companies
I think like Juan, I can remember the Green Book, and I've been doing this for a long time as well. And I think, one theme that particularly struck me in what Juan was saying is the length of regulation of some of these discussions. I mean, I can remember I was having a conversation at work about some of Ofcom's goals in the UK recently, and rather showing my age, I remember that I remembered Oftel as it then was, saying similar things in the early 90s, and they still hadn't come to pass. So I think there's some view that the view that we need some fundamental changes if we are to secure some of the future societal desires we have, I think is really important. And I think also listening to Juan, and I'm interested in obviously Reinhard and Broderick's views too, but you do increasingly see the different societal importance of the kind of services that our companies offer. When I was first working, there was a real focus on the transformational power of fixed line telephones. We were doing a lot of work on seeing, at that point, there were 10% or so people in the UK that didn't have a telephone in their homes. That was a big public policy issue. How do we address that? And I think that's been, hugely magnified by the kinds of services we offer today. So there is a very important societal dimension, I think, to our companies, and society as a whole, regulators, politicians, all have a part to play alongside our companies in making sure we can meet those challenges, I think.
And do you think that well, actually, we could move into the government policy segment.
Well, maybe I'll just perhaps say a few more points on the second question, the digital transformation as well. I mean, I think, again, my views are very similar to some of the other ones expressed, but I think for me, there's two elements to that. There's connectivity and how we can deliver improved connectivity, both in our fixed and mobile networks. I think we've talked about that a great deal. Perhaps I can return to one other point that I've touched on before and others have too, which is sustainability. And effectively thinking about the environmental and other impacts of our businesses. I mean, for example, the European Commission announced in 2019 they wanted to achieve a twin transition of a green and digital economy. And I think that's something that that we take very much to heart. For example, some research recently that was done by Auxerre in Belgium showed that teleworking could reduce emissions by something like 670 kilograms of CO2 per person per year. And I think those kind of things show how our industry can help. But more practically, just for my own company, and I think this is something for all of us, you know, thinking about how we can change the impact we have. In 2020, we managed to improve the energy efficiency of our business by 44%. Big thing there was using better technologies for cooling. Powering networks is expensive, cooling networks is expensive. So clearly that's a twin benefit, both in terms of the bottom line for us, but also environmental. And then we're very focused on recycling. Last year, again, we saved $141 million, focusing on environmental initiatives, reducing waste, refurbishing things. And a key focus there for us has been, for example, ensuring that our set-top boxes are refurbished and recycled, that when they come back, we get them back and we put them back into customers' homes. And trying to commit explicitly to that, we've certainly committed that we're going to reduce our Scope 1 and our Scope 2 emissions, that's our direct and indirect CO2 emissions, by at least 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050 compared with 2019. So I think that this environmental element is also going to be key to our business, because you are noticing more and more in the public debate. It's not just airlines or transport that are being talked about in this area, it's also businesses such as ours. So whilst we can have a real benefit to society, we also have to be mindful of the cost of the environment.
I think these are all really great points about this period of transformation. What will it look like? How do all the pieces fit together? You know, starting with the three elements that Juan had, the important role of sustainability. We've been talking about that for a long time, but I really find in conversations like this that it is moving to the front in terms of a priority, of course, with all the discussion of climate change and so on, and with a newfound recognition of things that perhaps the sector has been doing for some time is increasing, but it just wasn't recognized even for the importance of what was being done previously. But now everybody's much more of the mode of thinking, we're in this together, how can we find use any lever or use any measure that's helpful. Then let's go to the community, the way of looking at it that includes the government officials, right? So we've been talking about industry perspective, et cetera, and talking about the need to have environments that are enabling the changes that your companies have made and are continuing to make, of course, require a high level of investment. Juan, why don't we start with you on the last point of what do you hope for from regulators and policymakers to enable positive outcomes for all? And not having been the author of the heading, I do want to commend those who drafted it as making sure to put in that point about for all, right? Positive outcomes for all, and how those term use could be enabled. So get us started on that one, please.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Yes, speaking about positive outcomes, let me first, if I may, take 1 minute to underline the importance of the last words from Michael. I think it's critical and it's so exciting as companies to see how digital and green go together so well? And what is that positive outcome and putting them both together in two aspects, I would say, and so important for Telefonica, I'm sure for all telco companies. One of them is how societies become greener as they become more digitalized. They both together necessarily, and Michael provided so illustrative examples. And the other one is how we companies can very rapidly have so important outcomes in terms of lowering emissions, in terms of lowering waste. And this is not a time to speak about this, but the Telefonica team who is leading this has really excited employees around them to make this possible. So thank you, Michael, for bringing this into the conversation, because I think it is really one of the important upside about new companies in this new age starting now. And what do we hope from regulators? I'm sure Michael and I could be hoping for regulators for a very long time, but I will try to focus maybe in a few things, you know, in this question. And as you said, Jackie, thinking about not only about Telefonica. Well, focusing on what do we need to make possible digitalization through the telecom industry, and focusing maybe in three wishes, just three wishes. First, competition policy, very especially merger control policy, needs urgently to have a new view on processes, consolidations processes in Europe. We have to manage such a difficult situation in Europe compared to the main countries, to the United States or to China or to some Asian countries in the world. And this is, we are not a digital single market. Unfortunately, we are not a digital single market. We are 27 digital national markets. In such a fragmented region, it is unsustainable and it is inconsistent with establishing objectives at the Digital Compass for 2030 to have also fragmented national market. So competition policy has to look in a new way to transactions happening to make possible more relevant player. Michael, before to this transaction, we both have the honor to be part of it, and that was how we joined our British companies just a few months ago in a really big and important JV. Well, this is the way in front of that is the only way in front of us to deliver the outcomes we have to do. So first wish, first hope, a review on competition policy. And we are really expecting optimistically new guidelines that we expect from the European Commission on competition policy, and hopefully they will refer in these terms about the new merger control view. Second, I think we really need to have a different view from so many years of ex-ante regulation. In a way, we made really possible to focus on making sure a level playing field first, but also to make possible strong players competing stronger in the European markets and in the Latin American countries. We have built a kind of regulation that was focused on being sure there was a high number of players in every market and prices were decreasing every year. This is not the paradigm today at all. This is not the way to build those strong players. So I think that we need a big review, probably in the regulation, but very, very especially on how regulation is implemented by national regulatory authority at national level in both continents, Europe and Latin America. And the third, from my point of view, is we need to make it possible the development of digital services by telecom or non-telecom operators, really with a focus in the long term and understanding how the world is today. We had a judgment from the Justice Tribunal of the European Union very recently about zero rating. It's just an example, but I think it's time to make sure what is the impact of decisions taken by every authority regarding digital services, to understand how the market is evolving and what is the outcome of certain decisions if we are not very accurate in the analysis previous to take that decision. If we think about Latin America in a way, all this is applicable to Latin America, but especially there, it's so important how a spectrum policy develops. A spectrum policy has to focus so much on deployment of networks to make sure connectivity is available for every citizen in Latin America. This is the main point. And for this, you need incentives to investment. And there are policy incentives in place always, and you have always the chance. They are from a fiscal point of view, from the tax point of view, or from many other points of view. And last of all, probably rethinking universal service funding in Latin America is another relevant point that could be addressed immediately. So this is the short list about hope and wishes for regulators.
Yes. Michael, what would you add?
I mean, I would concur with everything that I've just heard. I think it's all very fair. I think in some ways my answer is going to be simple. And when I was thinking about how I would answer this question, unfortunately, in the end, it occurred to me that I was probably going to give an answer that I might have given at any point in my career and working for a variety of different companies in that time. But I think there's two things I would look for from regulators and policymakers. And I think it ties back to what I said earlier about the ability of private investors to be transformational in this space. I mean, just to get an example of the power of private investment, VMO2 in the UK, the joint venture between Liberty Global and Telefonica, has exclusively relied on private investment to make its fixed networks. And by the end of this year, its entire footprint is going to be capable of offering services of 1 gigabit a second. Comparing that with BT, I think they're going to be at 20% 1 gig by the end of the year. So I think it very clearly shows that private investment and network competition can really drive excellent outcomes for consumers and citizens. So that being the case, my rather non-groundbreaking answer that as an investor, I think what we're most interested in from regulators is a predictable regulatory regime which supports investment and supports what is long-term investment. And I think in that, we would expect in the end that will provide for competition and will lead in the end to the best outcomes for consumers. It's great to see governments putting funds into supporting companies that are investing in physical networks. But I think it's really important that public investments don't disincentivize private investors. And equally important that those public investments don't go beyond what's truly needed. I think public money should be targeted very much towards those areas that are either badly served or that are not served at all. Because I think private funding in infrastructure is great for competition, great for customers, but it can be driven out by, frankly, the fear of competing with someone who doesn't have to make a competitive return. As I think that's the fundamental thing, a long-term predictable environment that doesn't disincentivize private investment is what's going to provide top quality service for customers across nations beyond what any other method could deliver.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Michael Brian Brown from Liberty Global and Juan Montero from Telefonica. This has been a really interesting conversation, and thanks for helping to bring this here to the IIC.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you to you, Jackie, and to IIC for your invitation.
Absolutely.